So good to see all of you. My name is Jova, and I am a Ford Foundation Curatorial Fellow here at MOCAD, and I had the absolute pleasure of curating 2+2 equals 8, 30 years of Heidelberg. Thank you. So today, we are going to be going through a little talk with Rachel Adams on the history of Heidelberg, specifically as rebellion. So thinking about Heidelberg as an act of rebellion, Rachel's really interested in how artists respond to cities specifically without institutional support or encouragement and taking their work into their own hands. So we'll hear from her to tell you a little bit more about who Rachel is. Rachel Adams is a senior curator at UB Art Galleries in Buffalo, New York, where she programs 2 distinct exhibition spaces and oversees a collection of modern and contemporary art. Her areas of research include crossover between contemporary art and architecture, video and new media practices, and social practice in regards to Rust Belt cities. In 2018, she curated Varsha Hita Uria Dice Medusa and curated Introducing Tony Conrad, a retrospective. The first exhibition of Tony Conrad's work after the artist's death at the UB Art Galleries with the Albright Knox Art Gallery. In 2017, her exhibition Wanderlust, Actions, Traces, Journeys, 1967 to 2017, a 50-year-long survey of artists performing in the landscape, was awarded at grants from the Andy Warhol Foundation for Visual Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts, with a catalog by MIT Press. Adams holds an MA in Exhibition and Museum Studies from San Francisco Art Institute and a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her writing has been included in exhibition catalogs, including Tony Conrad, a retrospective, Out of Easy Reach, Prospect 3, New Orleans, and Texas Prize 2012, among others, as well as publications including Afterimage, Artforum.com, Art Papers, Art Practicals, Modern Printers, and Texas Architects. I'm so excited to welcome Rachel to Detroit. Rachel, let's give it up.
Thank you, Jova. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, let me move my stuff over a little. Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's really great to be back in Detroit. I haven't been back for a few years, so it's amazing to be able to see this wonderful exhibition. I'm only sad that I don't get to see the other part of it that opens in a month, but I'm sure all of you will, and I'll hopefully maybe get here. But yeah, I just wanted to again, thank you guys for coming. This is really exciting for me. I've been sort of thinking about the Heidelberg Project for about a decade now, and so I wrote my graduate thesis about it when I was in graduate school in San Francisco, and I feel like it's sort of evolved my thinking about it since then, and so it was really exciting for me to be able to kind of revisit it and think it under the sort of guise of the history of it as a rebellion. Thinking about artists that are really, active in their cities and working in a way that is outside of the sort of cultural norms, outside of the white cube, outside of the museum space, and thinking about their community and how they can make change in their community. So I'm going to go through a bunch of slides, and then we'll have questions, and I encourage conversation because I think that's also what Heidelberg does, and I think it's really important. The street is an equalizing place, and that is the place Tyree Guyton chose as a starting point for the Heidelberg Project. Moments constructed into situations might be thought of as moments of rupture, of acceleration, revolutions in individual everyday life. I think about this quote a lot, especially in reference to the Heidelberg Project. I just think that, each of us in our everyday life can sort of create these moments of rupture. We can speed things up, we can slow things down, we can choose what we want to focus on. And I think that Tyree and other artists that sort of work in this vein really do that on an everyday basis. There's a really long history of artists sort of going out to the streets, leaving their studios to make change, to create in spaces that are not so pristine, and to interact with what's happening in their neighborhood and their city. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the project, and then I'm going to speak to the work sort of in relation to like our historical lineage, as well as how it fits into how it relates to sort of artist environments and kind of vernacular self-taught artists. And then how I believe it sort of has helped pave the way for other projects, for other artistic community interventions. I have to admit that one has to both love art and be extremely idealistic in order to think that like art can change a city, especially a city that might have such an embedded history of blight and white flight and all of these sort of things that the post-industrial city, Detroit obviously, Buffalo where I live right now, has. But when I came across the Heidelberg Project, which was through my old roommate in Chicago, we grew up in Ann Arbor and we spent a lot of time coming to see it when she was growing up. That's what I loved about it from the very beginning. It was really idealistic and it was really vibrant and it still is, I don't want to say that it's not those things anymore. And you felt sort of a power behind it, but I think sometimes you don't feel that when you look at art in a gallery. So that was what was really kind of important to me and that kind of stuck with me. The mission of the Heidelberg Project, I'm sure most of you know this, but is an outdoor art environment in the heart of an urban area and a Detroit-based community organization with a mission to improve the lives of people and neighborhoods through art. So, I think that it's a really wonderful mission. I think it's a really difficult one. It's time to challenge the norm, to create a spectacle that is so striking and offbeat, it forces you to look, see, and think. I am idealistic. I do believe that art can transform people's lives and places. And obviously I think that Tyree also feels that way, and I'm hoping some of you in the audience also feel that way. I think that it can be really difficult for people. They feel that, if they haven't been sort of brought up with the idea of culture in their lives or maybe taken to museums when they're young, and they might feel like they don't understand this. And I think that's understandable. And what I love about this project and projects like this is that it brings it out into a space that is not so closed off, it's right outside your door. And I think that I was watching an old documentary about the Heidelberg actually, and Tyree said that, when he was in school, he had asked his neighbors to come see his artwork, and they said no, like in his studio, and they had said no because they didn't feel like it was for them. And so I think that really, helped spur him on to step outside his door and actually just start making the work in his neighborhood because he wanted it to be for them. And I think, it was unsanctioned, right? Like he just started doing it. He felt a pull to do that, and since its inception, it has gained recognition internationally. Hundreds of thousands of people have come to see it from all over the world. And Tyree has also traveled and talked about it, obviously, in many different cities and states and countries. So some of you might know the inception of the project, but quickly it began with Tyree, obviously stepping out and with a mission to change his environment. And using what was available throughout the city, Tyree with his former wife and his grandfather, created this space, and it's been ongoing since 1986. To tell the truth, to make people really look at what's happening. I really don't like showing images like this because I feel like it sort of is, I hate that idea of rude porn and all of those things that I'm sure you, all in the audience, especially if you live here or have lived in a city like Detroit, are sick of looking at those images. But I also think something like this is really important to kind of show that there is all of this space, and the space isn't being used, and what can we do about it, you know? I think that it's one of those ways that you can create change is to show people what they don't want to see. I'm also a little sick, so I apologize if I sound a little stuffed. So the city, you know, after they, of course, recognized the Heidelberg Project and Guyton as an artist doing major things, you know, they got a lot of complaints from his neighbors, and I'm sure, again, some of you know the story, but in 1991, they came and bulldozed several of the buildings. And I can't even imagine what that felt like, how heartbreaking that was for Tyree, for his grandfather, and for all the people that had sort of been helping and working to make this space for the community. You know, how quickly that just sort of came in and tore down several of the projects. I mean, these were obviously city-owned or about to be city-owned properties, and they weren't sanctioned for art, but you know, it still can be really tough. But I think one thing to think about when we think about the destruction that's happened over the several years of this project is that this came about because neighbors were complaining, because they came out and started talking about it. And they weren't doing that before, they weren't talking before. And so at least it did kind of create some sort of conversation, whether that was positive or negative. I do think that made people act. They weren't so complacent with what was going on around them anymore. And that, I think, is sort of an important thing to show. I think this is a really powerful image, so I'm just going to let it speak for itself. So speaking about unsanctioned art projects, John Beardsley has, I'm quoting him, "Like them or not, they are emblems of resurrection, of the capacity of individuals, arguably even communities, to recreate themselves from ruins, with or without official involvement." And he had written this great essay in a book called Connecting the Dots, Tyree Guyton's Heidelberg Project, which if you guys are interested, it's a really amazing book full of wonderful essays about Heidelberg and the city and its history. So definitely something to peruse if you have the time. But I think that it's true. It's projects like this that call sort of attention to what's going around, what's happening in cities, and then sort of are basically like putting it onto the government, being like I'm doing this is what's happening. You can see that all of these, you know, houses are decrepit and falling down, and it's not safe, and so it does really like mess with what might have just been forgotten about. So this is a screenshot from the film about Heidelberg. The city obviously did not replace any of the demolished houses with new construction, but tearing down parts of the project was a way for them to control the history of the city. And you know, they did that again in 1999. But I think that it's always sort of a push-pull because the project is still going on and it has been supported and it has brought in, you know, people, and the economy has grown because of that specific project. So I think that it's, you know, it's hard to say that it's a bad thing or a good thing. The blighted neighborhood also, you know, has acted as inspiration for Tyree to use the detritus of the city. You know, his work, as you can see in the gallery over here, consists of materials and found objects scavenged from all sites of Detroit. He responds to the abandonment of the city by reincorporating these objects into his work and, you know, re-enlivening them, giving them a new life. It's also what I was thinking about earlier is I just read this book, which was a fictionalized book, and it was just sort of a fun summer read. but it talked about this architect who made a 20-mile house, and everything had been gathered from 20 miles away from the site of the house. And it talked about how she was a green architect before there were green architects, and I thought, oh, you know what? That's Guyton, that's Tyree. Like, he is a green artist. He's using recycled materials. Before that was even cool to talk about in a way. I mean, obviously, artists have been using found materials for a long time, but I think thinking about Detroit and the population leaving and sort of leaving all of these things behind, and Tyree being able to sort of build up a new space using those things is really quite fascinating. What is the Heidelberg Project to you? For me, it's a multitude of things. It's a statement on the state of Detroit throughout the years. It changed every time something happened to it, every time it got added to. It's a community gathering place. It's a commentary on American life in the post-industrial city, and it's a green project. But it's also a place of beauty and love and a safe haven and an area where children can come and learn about art, something that they don't get access to in school every day. Each of the artworks that make up the project, the houses, trees, and freestanding structures, bear scars of being discarded, neglected, and undervalued. Yet, in this landscape, they also appear to be cultivated blooms. When I was driving here last night from the airport, my Lyft driver asked me why I was here, and I told him, and he said, oh, okay. And I said, oh, what do you think about the Heidelberg Project? And he said, I think it's junk. And I said, okay, well, why do you think that? He goes, oh, well, there's just all this stuff. It's all this stuff there. And I said to him, well, I think that all of that stuff had lives once, and the artist is, using it to re-envision, make it, sort of a new place. And then he sort of went on to talk about how he was from Nashville, and and that's a city that's very controlled. What you can sort of do to your house or your space is very controlled. They wanted to keep it pristine. And he said he loved that Detroit was not like that. That there was sort of this guerrilla way of, doing whatever you wanted up until a point, and that sort of gave life to the city that he really appreciated. And so, in the end, I think that he was like, oh, okay, well, I'm hoping our conversation may have changed his mind a little bit on the fact that it wasn't just junk, but you never know. Like I said, of course, people don't see beauty in certain things, but as a curator and as someone that is just interested in how space is used and what you can do to make space different than what it was before. There's paint peeling, and it's not the most beautiful thing. But what is beauty, right? Like, what is that exactly? Like, what is art? All those questions are sort of things that I think the Heidelberg and other projects like this bring about. It's not about the material, but about our capacity to shape things. That is a quote by Esther, who's an artist in Chicago. I'm going to actually talk about him a little bit later, but I really liked this quote. I wanted to bring it in here because I feel like it relates to what Tyree and the Heidelberg Project is attempting. The material is just the vessel, but the action is what really matters. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most pristine thing. It's really about actually going out there and doing something and being a little bit rebellious, because that's going to get things started. There's going to be conversation. There's going to be people that are affected. The time is now. And I really appreciate this saying, and I was just reading one of the labels inside the gallery a little bit ago, because it is really, a call to action. It has been a call to action for over 30 years now, and I think that we can all be sort of complacent in our lives and complain about things and, not really take a stand or do anything about them. And I remember reading something or maybe hearing something Tyree said about, that sort of saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And he said, if it's not broke, break it. And so I kind of think about that, and I think about, the time is now as sort of, a call to action. And obviously, there's a lot that happens in our everyday lives, but, can you sort of put yourself in someone else's shoes or put yourself in a situation that maybe makes you a little bit uncomfortable, but, you could affect some sort of change. And I think that's what the Heidelberg Project does. It's really an alternative model to urban revitalization. It's not a developer coming in and building mixed use and making sure that, of course, like some of it is market rate and some of it is, a little better for low income. It's really like, it's a place that transforms both the city space and individual mindsets, and I think that's what is really important. Just love this picture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Heidelberg within sort of an art historical lineage, just to kind of talk about the specificness of the work. And I just think that, Tyree is a trained artist, and he even has an honorary doctorate from the College for Creative Studies. So, I think that some people think that because of the way that he creates his work and what it looks like, they might think that he's sort of untrained, but actually he's not. Kind of going to Marcel Duchamp and the ready-made. This is the bicycle wheel, which was his first ready-made, and Duchamp said about it, I had the happy idea to fasten a bicycle wheel to a kitchen stool and watch it turn. And that actually, I think about when I read that a few days ago, I was like, that's actually, I feel like that, I could see that sculpture on Heidelberg Street, It's really something very simple, transforming something into something else. And most of Duchamp's ready-mades were individual objects that he repositioned and called art, some which he combined with others, but others which he did not. And I wanted to put this one in here because there used to be a lot of commodes on Heidelberg Street, so I thought it was a nice ode to that. Kurt Schwitters was an early 20th century Dada artist whose collages were made in the wake of the First World War, as sort of hopeful portraits of how destruction can feed creation. So using scraps of paper and advertising and garbage and wood and urban debris, he brought those things all together to create something that was really beautiful. This is one of my favorite collages of his from 1919. And he went on, he was always sort of using collage, but he kind of went on to move more into actual creating spaces. It was sort of a whole philosophy that he adopted, and he called it MERS. So this is the MERS bow. But it's sort of a nonsense word that became kind of his personal brand. This was destroyed, unfortunately, and he sort of redid it because he had to move around because of in between World War I and II. But it was sort of a kind of abstract walk-in collage art environment composed of grottos and columns and found objects that were sort of ever-shifting and ever-expanding. It was more than just a studio. And I think about, for me, that as I get to, I'm lucky enough to be able to work with artists and spend time with them and spend time in their studios. And I think about how when you go into someone's studio and they're really, pretty prolific artists, or they've been working on something, that they're about to kind of put out into the world, it feels a little bit like you're walking into their brain, and that you're sort of lucky enough to kind of be in that space. And I think about Kurt Schwitters and Merzbow a lot when I'm sort of in that space myself, and I feel like that's also something that Tyree did with the Heidelberg Project, right? Like, you're really like walking through, his brain and his life and, his love for the place that he lives and what, and how to make, how he decided to sort of change that. And then of course there's Robert Rauschenberg. These are some of his combines. Combine is a term Rauschenberg invented to describe a series of works that combine aspects of painting and sculpture. So virtually like eliminating all distinctions between these two artistic categories. The combines can hang on the wall, they're freestanding. He really endowed new significance to ordinary objects by placing them in the context of art. And this was sort of, obviously post-war, when artists were coming back into, after, dealing with some wartime things. A lot of them were going back to school. A lot of them were moving to cities and sort of living in cities and, walking the cities and being able to sort of collect things that they're seeing. And so the combines came out of that. And then I wanted to bring Ntsui into this conversation. Ntsui is an internationally acclaimed artist who transforms simple materials into complex assemblages that create distinctive visual impact. He is basically using trash to create these pieces. He typically uses discarded liquor bottle caps to create sculptures that sort of defy kind of a categorization. They're visually really beautiful. They reflect his interest in reusing materials and transformation, and the desire to connect to his to where he lives, which is he's from Africa, while like sort of transcending place. And his work can also sort of interrogate the history of colonialism, drawing connections between consumption and waste and the environment, but also sort of using his own formal visual language that distinguishes his practice. So I wanted to talk a little bit about now a couple of projects that are art environments, similar in the sense to the Heidelberg Project, ones that sort of preceded it and also others that came afterwards. And this is, there's tons of art environments all over the world. I only picked a few to talk about today, but if that's an interest of yours, I'm happy to. I suggest you all go to the Kohler Art Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, because it's a wonderful place to learn about this type of work, and they actually have several art environments that they sort of take care of. So it's a plug for them, but it's amazing. So these are the Waltz Towers in Los Angeles. The artist was Simon Rodia, and he started construction on these in 1922. There's a collection of 17 interconnected towers, architectural structures, and sort of individual sculptural elements and mosaics on his property. He obviously no longer is living. The towers, he was a tile mason, he wasn't a trained artist. And the towers were made of his own concoction of concrete wrapped with wire mesh. And then, of course, they're decorated with found objects, including ceramic tiles and bottles and seashells and mirrors and ceramic figurines and things like that. And it's a pretty magical place. I highly suggest visiting. They now have, it has a sort of long history, which I'll go over a little bit, but they now do have like sort of a community center, and they do programming there. When the artist passed away, nobody sort of took over his space, and it was eventually bought by an actor and another person in Los Angeles to sort of keep it because it was such a prideful place. But they had tried to actually tear it down, and due to his amazing ability as a sort of tile mason and thinking about the materials of concrete, they tried to do like a stress test on it to make sure it was like okay to keep up, and it would not even budge. So now people have been studying it and the material of it to kind of base other architecture on because of how sturdy this work is. So just sort of, kind of a really interesting story. This is the Prophet Isaiah Robertson's home in Niagara Falls. So if you want to come to Buffalo to visit me, we can go up here. Around 2007, the Prophet began to build and design what is today his home. He's been working sort of tirelessly ever since. He has been sort of a little less busy lately, but you know, he tells visitors that the cross at his home is sort of the final cross. He did think that in 2014 the world was going to end, and this was sort of the place that would happen. Obviously, we're still here. But it's a really amazing, visually unbelievable spectacle, and also, you know, kind of a space where people gather and talk. It has obviously a lot of religious iconography, but that doesn't mean that it can't appeal to everybody, or people from all walks of life, I should say. This is just an interior shot, which is beautiful. And then I wanted to, I'm sure some of you have been to the Ham Tram at Disney World. If you haven't, it's still up in Hamtramck. The original artist passed away, but it was actually just bought recently, maybe 2 years ago, by a group to kind of keep it going because it's such a wonderful place to visit. This is another view of the back of it. So again, like all of these are sort of, these are projects that are unsanctioned. They're the output of creative people that are wanting to change and add to their environment. Just like the Heidelberg Project. Houses at its founding 2 decades ago, so it's, you know, it's pretty close to the same age as Heidelberg. It was comprised of 22 houses spanning about a block and a half. And today it occupies 6 blocks. It includes 40 properties, as well as, which include exhibition and residency spaces for artists, office space for the foundation, and then also a community gallery, park, low-income residential and commercial spaces, and then houses in which young mothers can live in for up to a year and receive support as they finish school and kind of get their bearings depending on what their situation was. So that's what it sort of started as. Many of these houses were for young mothers in the neighborhood that needed a place to stay, and then it's sort of grown into this much larger community-driven space. And then it's located in the 3rd Ward in Houston, which has seen like many other revitalization attempts. You know, this was, of course, like an underutilized area. But, you know, that sort of course, then makes people nervous because they think that it will sort of shift the tide and lower income residents will be forced out of their neighborhood. So there's a push, again, that push and pull. Gentrification and that word, and, you know, artists sort of coming into neighborhoods and revitalizing them, and then people that are higher income moving into those neighborhoods because they're cool, and sort of then moving residents out. I mean, it's a cycle that unfortunately does happen in a lot of places. I think with Project Row Houses, they're really cognizant of that, and they're really trying to keep the low income housing that they have and even grow that. This is just a little bit about them. They exist for art, community, and neighborhood. And Rick Lowe, who's the founder, says, we weren't trying to do something to serve the arts community. We were trying to figure out how the arts community could serve the community. And I think that's sort of really important. It wasn't like an art project. It wasn't started as an art project or an art exhibition space within a neighborhood. It was a place started for the community, incorporating art into it. This is the Rebuild Foundation. This is the Esther Foundation. We mentioned earlier, he's an artist in Chicago. And he was a ceramic artist, and he was living on the south side of Chicago, and he was sort of working in his studio and just living his everyday life. But kind of realizing that he wanted to sort of make a little bit more of a difference in his neighborhood than just having his studio there. He was able to buy a house that's on the left here, and then eventually the other building next to it, and create a community space. And now they have, I actually don't have it written down, I don't know how many buildings, but basically they're a platform for art, cultural development, and neighborhood transformation. Their projects are supported by artists and strengthened by communities by providing free arts access and programming, creating new cultural amenities, developing, again, affordable housing, studio, and live workspace. This is the Stony Island Arts Bank that they own and run, and their mission is to demonstrate the impact of innovative, ambitious, and entrepreneurial arts and cultural initiatives. They're informed by 3 core values: Black people matter, Black spaces matter, and Black objects matter. They actually are they have the archives of Ebony and Jet magazine, the Johnson & Johnson company, and they leverage the power and potential communities, buildings, and objects that others have written off. This is their library. It's amazing. And it's open. And then, again, coming back to Detroit, because I think that, the city has the ability to let all of these sort of projects happen. The Powerhouse Productions is an artist-run neighborhood-based nonprofit founded by Mitch Cope and Gina Reichart in 2009. This was another project that I did some research on for my graduate thesis. And I've since, watched what's been happening with them. When I first wrote about them, they just owned this house. They had just sort of finished it. And now they have sort of a network of project houses and art installations and dynamic programming that's happening in the area, in the Ham Tram area. They also, integrate arts and culture into the daily life of the diverse neighborhood that they live in. And creating public spaces for the exchange of ideas, opinions, and experiences. Really, what I think is, with all of these projects, it's important to think about the local and the global, right? Really affecting the local everyday lives of the people that are living there, but also being able to showcase that to a larger group of people that might, again, be influenced by them and do something in their own space. Which I think is what Heidelberg did. This is inside their playhouse that they have, so they stage a lot of productions. Their strategy is to embed contemporary art practices in the area with the neighborhood itself as a site of cultural and artistic production. Projects are driven by artists who live and work in the neighborhood, and while open to exchange of work from national and international art world. So they do bring in people, but then they also work a lot with neighborhood people. And then they have, of course, strategic partnerships with other places to sort of allow for, organic growth to happen. Through programs that cross cultures and genres, they engage residents on multiple levels and really solicit feedback and research and, really want participation. So there's no doubt that the Heidelberg Project has had its share of challenges, and with the launch of Heidelberg 3.0, it's sort of reevaluating what it will look like in the future, which I think is really important for organizations, like all of these organizations, is to sort of, as nonprofits do a lot, we sort of do strategic planning. We think about what our goals are for the future, what has changed, and what we can do to kind of continue to sustain what our core missions are. So that's something that I think is really great that the Heidelberg is doing now, is sort of thinking about, what is the next step for us? With sort of thinking about making the area into more of a sort of self-sustaining art and cultural village. One that's really tied to the neighborhood still, and perhaps even embedded a little bit more with having more neighborhood buy-in, because that's something that I think has grown, obviously, over the course of the 30 years. It didn't start out with everybody loving it, and that's okay. I think that is something to say, that's okay. You don't have to love everything that's going on all the time. It would be impossible. But I do think engaging with your neighbors in productive ways could make it more impactful for everybody that's part of it. And I think that this quote by Tyree is really important, that he strives to be part of the solution. I see and understand how order is needed in the world and in our individual lives, My experiences have granted me the knowledge of how to create art and how to see beauty in everything that exists. And again, like, I think that that is a really powerful statement, and that we should sort of always take the time to not maybe judge something so quickly, something that I've also kind of learned myself from looking at a lot of these projects. And then I wanted to finish with this quote because I feel like it's really, I read a lot of David Harvey when I was doing some urban studies work and writing my thesis, and this quote always stuck out to me. The city is man's most consistent and on the whole his most successful attempt to remake the world he lives in, more after his heart's desire. The city is the world which man created. It is the world in which he is therefore condemned to live. Thus, indirectly, without a clear sense of the nature of his task in remaking the city, the man has remade himself. I feel like that really sums up how I feel about the Heidelberg Project.
Where do you draw the line between art such as what we saw today and actual blight?
An actual blight? I don't know if I can necessarily draw that line. I guess I would say that blight is something that is maybe not taken care of, right? So like there's many places in Buffalo even, I wouldn't say Buffalo because I'm so used to saying that, but Detroit also, that people they are just what they are. They've been left there, they're abandoned, there's nothing happening with them. And with, the Heidelberg Project, I would say that there's activation in those areas and activating it. Upkeep, maybe, yeah, upkeep. There you go, that's good. That's what I would say. Maybe somebody else has something different.
I just, when you first said that, I would think just intention. That seems like it's something else. Really.
Attention, right?
I don't know, intention.
Intention.
What is the relationship between him and his grandfather, Sam Mackey? Did he come in and start building it, and then his grandfather came in, or was his grandfather already creating things? Because obviously there must be some sort of art in the thing.
So as far as I know, and maybe Joe can also talk about this, but Sam, Tyree's grandfather, was a house painter, was an artist himself, and handed Tyree his first paintbrush. That's sort of how the story goes, and told him that he could do anything. And I think that Sam helped Tyree in those first years before he passed away, just with the project, and so some of it was his artwork, some of it was Tyree's artwork, some of it was his former wife Karen's artwork, and then other people from the neighborhood. So I think he was just also just like a mentor for Tyree. I didn't know him, so I can't really speak to that, but Joe, I don't know if you can add anything.
I would say he was one of his biggest influences, and I would also say that if we want to know, we can ask Janine, who is here. Janine Whitfield, who is the CEO of Heidelberg, as well as Tyree's wife, and major support person of the project. So thank you, Janine, for everything you've done with this. I think it's crucial. And I'm not actually going to put you on the spot, but if you want to know more about Tyree's relationship with Sam, I would say you should come back on November 15th when we will have a talk here with Tyree and Anita Jackson about Tyree's process, because Tyree's work though this conversation is about Heidelberg, Tyree's work is much larger in broad strokes than just Heidelberg. So I think that is an opportunity for us to talk more about that. I'm going to go over here.
Could you address what I thought was a very serious issue, the disconnect between Tyree's project and the neighborhood and the neighbors? My understanding is this was a neighborhood he grew up in, and his family still lived in that neighborhood, and yet there seemed to be a great deal of misunderstanding. I wonder if a lecture like this had been presented to the neighborhood before he started, or if there were any attempts made to bridge where Tyree was in his thinking and where the neighborhood was in its thinking.
I'm not sure if a lecture like this was presented. I think that, and maybe again, I don't want to put Janine on the spot, but she might know this better than me, is that, unfortunately there was a disconnect there. Some people looked at it as, his immediate neighbors were not happy with it. They weren't happy with the attention that it was getting, with the people that were coming, visitors coming to see it and all of these things. I can only imagine that there was a lot of conversation that happened between Tyree and his neighbors. There was an unfortunate episode of them going on to the Oprah show about it, which is too bad. I think that, certain things could be resolved hopefully more amicably, but I know that over the years, some of the neighbors did kind of sort of switch their mindset, and one in particular, I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking on her name, but I think that it's a tough situation. You don't know exactly what you're going to look at every day, and so they're definitely, I don't know, Janine looks like she's ready to speak.
Let me help you out with this a
Yes,
little bit.
thank you.
I want to just say that it's really important to recognize, look in the audience. Do you see who's here? You don't see very many African American people, do you? Do you know what I mean? I want to record my own reaction when I turned down Heidelberg Street 25 years ago. And I said, what in the hell is all of this? As an African-American woman and the African-American people in that community, they did not view Tyree's art form as art. And they felt embarrassed and they felt degraded. And I think that's very, very important for people to understand. I had a feeling like that myself. But now, what's interesting is what needed to happen was that people needed to, and this is how Tyree tells it, to look at their surroundings from the very same things that he used to create the project. It wasn't a front, and it was designed to get people's attention. It was designed to provoke. It was designed to make people stand up and begin to think about their community and their environment. So that dissent was part of what was necessary and part of what was important to try and change and open up a dialogue. And it did work. It definitely worked. Well, I think what I want to share about it, the woman who you couldn't remember her name until about, it took 25 years. But there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of hurt in the communities that we are working to change. And it's not simple. The people here have the luxury of being educated, and so they can study, and the people in the community felt like they were being on display. You've got to understand the complexities, but we're also addressing some very tough issues.
I would add that I think that at the end of your presentation, Rachel, you bringing up those other projects is a really beautiful and important example of how this legacy works in cities beyond Detroit as well, right? Like, you have to have some dissent, you have to have some disruption, you essentially have rebellion. And these are the things that fuel these conversations, and that's how we're able to have moments like this together where we can learn and grow, but also opportunities for people to change their minds. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about art in general, and the way the contemporary art world is changing today is you have people who are making these projects, Project Powerhouse, etc., who are really doing that work of agitating and then rewriting art history itself. And so I think that's important.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, before we close out, I just want to thank Rachel again. We can give a big hands up.